iterative elimination, sometimes we call it deletion, iterative deletion of strictly dominated strategies. Sometimes a person can trick you to rather look for weakly dominated strategy. Okay, so we remember we said that when both players have a dominant strategy, then the pure strategy Nash equilibrium is achieved already. And this is known as the dominant strategy equilibrium. But what if the players don't have dominant strategies? What if player A doesn't have a dominant strategy, player B doesn't have a dominant strategy? Then in that case, you use this elimination or deletion approach. And it goes hand in hand with using the best response approach. But I'll teach you the iterative elimination approach first. It is based on the common knowledge of rationality. In other words, the players must be rational human beings. They must be sensible enough to know that what they are doing is right for them. In order to do this, let's take a story. We have two airlines. The United Airlines, which is on the player one level, the role player, and then the American Airlines. And both of them, they fly. They fly, each one of them can fly passengers, fly 96, 64, and 48,000 passengers a year, every quarter. And they do that between Chicago and Los Angeles. So you can see that United Airlines, okay, flies 96,000 passengers in one of the quarters, 64,000 passengers, and 48,000 passengers. American Airlines, which is player two at the top, also flies 96,000 passengers, 64,000 output, which is the passengers, and then 48,000 passengers. So the passengers is the output. Now, if American Airlines, sorry, if the United Airlines should fly 96,000 passengers, whilst American Airlines flies 96,000 passengers, the payoff would be $00. Oh, sorry, yeah, 00, which is in millions of dollars. That would be the payoff. That would be the payoff. Now, if it happens that United Airlines should fly 48,000 passengers, okay, and American Airlines, let me change this slightly, and American Airlines rather fly 64,000 passengers. Okay. American Airlines flies 64,000 passengers here. The question is that then American Airlines is going to make more profit of $5.1 million, while the United Airlines makes $3.8 million. So keep this principle in mind. The first thing we want to know is to find out whether each player has a dominant strategy. Now, how do you do that? Now, first, let's do for United. Okay? And to check whether United has a dominant strategy, we look at the three strategies, 96, 64, 48. So we start by 96. So what we do is that we ask ourselves, if it's important here, if American Airlines should fly 96,000, which is what I've just highlighted, which airline, which fly do you think United will go for? Using the payoffs, you will notice that United will go for 48 because 2.3 is better than 2.0 and is better than 0. So let me repeat that. So if American should go for 96, United has the choice of going 96, 64, 48. If he goes 96, he's going to get 0. That's a red one. If he goes 64, he's going to get 2. If he goes 48, he's going to get 3. So he will go for what? 48. Because 2.3 is better than all his other returns. Now, the thing we need to ask ourselves is this. Is United going to maintain that 48 if American Airlines should change its strategy to 64? Well, let's see. If American goes for 64, United will not go for 3.1 because 4.1 is better than 3.1 and 4.1 is better than 3.8. So United will go for 4.1. That is what United will go for. Now, it means that if United is going for 4.1, then it means that United is rather selecting strategy 64. Because 4.1 is for this strategy 64. It means that United has changed the strategy. Because remember, earlier on, United had a strategy of 48. He should stick to that. Then it would have become a dominant. But he didn't stick with that, he changes it to 64. So we can say the moment he changes it once, he has no dominant strategy. Finish. Now we can say that United doesn't have a dominant strategy. Okay. So now we know that we are not going to use a dominant strategy equilibrium approach. Now let's look at American, because sometimes one doesn't have a dominant strategy, but the other has. Now for American, for you to be able to examine that of American Airlines, you have to assume what United does. So if United should go for 96, which one do you think, which strategy of 96, 64, 48, which strategy do you think American will go for? Type it for me. Which strategy? If United should go for 96, American will go for which strategy? Let me know. 48, that's a correct answer, Mark. You go for 48 because 4.6, sorry, because 2.3, remember United is the second value. 2.3 on the far right is better. 2.3 is better than 2.0 and is better than 2. Now let's see whether he will also maintain his 48. If United should now go for 64, which strategy do you think American will go for? If United goes for 64, which strategy do you think American will go for? United go for 64. So United is on the 64 line. Which strategy will American go for? American will also go for 64 because 4.1 is bigger than the rest. So American changes his strategy. So we can now conclude that American also does not have a dominant strategy. So the point is simple. No, neither firm has a strictly dominant strategy. Now, once you don't get dominant strategy, then it means that you can't use the dominant strategy equilibrium to find the answer. So what do you do? What you do is that you use the iterative elimination of strictly dominated strategy. Now, for you to do that, you need to identify those strategies that are strictly dominated. You need to find that, okay? Those strategies that are strictly dominated. So let's go back to the preamble. Okay. So now we are looking at the strategy in all, and this is very important, so you want to pay attention. So when you are looking at United like this, okay, let's talk about United strategy 96. So I'm looking at United strategy 96, and with that United strategy 96, I am looking at value 0, okay, this value. I'm comparing this value with that value 3.1, with that value 4.6. I'm comparing it with the other values of 64. So I'm comparing the 0 with the 2.0 with the 2.3. Now, when you look at it, 96, 64, 48, under this first column, you will see that the biggest one is what? The biggest one is 2.3. Okay, so let's take 2.3 is bigger than, so this is how you normally look at it. You take the 96 and then compare it with the 64. Then you take that same 96 and compare it with the 48. Then you come to the second one, you take the 64 and compare it with the 48. And I'm looking at the horizontal situation. So let's take the 96. 96, I'm having 0, 3.1, 4.6. Let's compare 0 and the 64 values. 64 strategy. If you compare the 0 and the 2.0, you can see that the 64 dominates the 96 strictly. If you look at 3.1 and 4.1, you can see that the 4.1 strictly dominates that. So 64 dominates 96. And when you look at the 5.1 and the 4.6, which is the last one here, you can see that a 5.1 dominates 46. So strictly speaking, let me write it here. Okay. So strictly speaking, there is no doubt that we can say that for strategy 64, this is how we write it. 64 strictly dominates 96 for American Airline. Okay. So 64 strictly dominates 96. Now it is strict because all the numbers in 64, which is 2, look at 2, all the numbers, every one of the numbers in 64, when you look at them carefully, all of them, they are bigger than that. So when you look at this one, and then you look at that one, and then you look at the last one, which is 5, they are all bigger than the ones above them. So strategy 64 strictly dominates strategy 94. Let's put that down. Let's go to the next one. The next one is comparing the 96. Oh, it is 96. And I kept saying 94. It's 96, right? It is strategy 96. Okay. Now let's compare the 96 with the 48. So you take the 0 and the 2.3. You can see that 2.3 is bigger. So 48 is bigger than strategy 48 exceeds. We are doing for United. The first numbers are always for United. So everything I'm doing is for United. Okay? So I wrote American. So it's supposed to be United for you. Supposed to be United. All right. So let's continue. So if you look at the next strategy, 2.3 is better than 0. Let's see whether it will run through that throughout, so that 48 becomes better than 96. The next one, 3.8 is better than 3.1, so that's fine. The next one, they are equal. They are equal. But in general, 2 of the columns here, 2 of the numbers here are bigger than the 96. So in this case, it wouldn't be strictly dominate, but it would be weakly dominate. Okay, so on the basis of that, we can say that strategy 48, okay, strategy 48, okay, weakly, you make it like greater or equal to. Weakly dominates strategy 96 for the same United. That is how we say. Okay, so you should know the difference between weakly dominated. So this means that 96 is weakly dominated by 48. That's what it means. And 48 weakly dominates 96. Now, the last one is to compare 64 and 48. So if you look at 64 and 48, you can see that the first one, 48 is leading. The second one, 64 is rather leading because 4.1 is better than 3.8. So in this case, there is no weakly domination. There is no strict domination. And so that one, you don't write anything. So this is for United. Now let's go to American. Let's go to American. Now to go to American, okay, and by the way, everything that I did is here. So let me just show you before we go. Okay, this is what we did. This is what we did for the weekly and then the strictly. Okay. Oh, this was even for American. And you're going to see that it's the same thing. So let's look at American. So if you look at American, you're comparing the 96 and 64. And you're looking at the black numbers. Okay. So 96 and 64, the first one, you see that 64 is winning. Okay. 96 and 64, the second one, you see that 64 is winning because 4.1 is better than 3.1. 96 and 64, you see that 5.1 is better than 4.6. So in all respect, 64 strictly dominates 96. That's what you can say for American. Okay. For American, you can say that 64 strictly. 64 strictly dominates 96 for American. Now let's compare 96 and then 48. 96 and 48, you can see that 2.3 is better than 0. You can see that 3.8 is better than 3.1. And yet you can see that 4.6 is equal to 4.6. So again, you say that 48 weakly dominates 96. And now the last one is 64 and then 48. For 64 and 48, you can see that 2.3 is bigger than 2, but then 4.1 is bigger. And so because 4.1 is bigger, there's no domination for that. And that spoils the domination attitude. Okay. So on the basis of this, those that are dominated, we are going to delete them. Okay. So those that are dominated. So remember, 96 was dominated in all angles. 96 was dominated. So what you will do is this, and watch me here very carefully. Okay. What you do is that you are now going to take this 96 and cancel it because it's dominated. So the whole of this will be canceled. And the whole of this will also be canceled. So you can see that we've been able to kill strategy 96 for United, strategy 96 for American, because they are dominated. They are dominated. Okay, it was strictly dominated. So that is gone. That is gone. Let's go to the results here. Now remember, this thing was using strict domination. Okay, so we are focusing on the strict domination. If he had said weak domination, okay, we would have handled that one too, but then there's no weak domination you mentioned. So now you can see that we've killed the red numbers. They are all gone. We are left with the blue numbers. So now we are left with just this one to deal with. And when they are no longer plenty, when the matrices are no longer plenty, but we are now kind of down to just this. Okay. So we are now just left with this. How do you handle it? How do you deal with something like this? Okay. Well, you can now look at it carefully, and you can still go ahead and use the iterative elimination. So now we are going to look at this iterative elimination using this approach. We are now looking at 64 and 48. So look at 64, okay, for United. 64 gives us what? Gives us, just go back. 64 gives us 4.1, and then 48 gives us 3.8. So you can see that 64 dominates 48 there. Let's go to the next one here. 64 here gives us 5.1, and then 48 gives us 4.6. So once again, 64 dominates 48. So on the basis of that, you can see that we can kill 48. Using iterative elimination, we can kill 48. And so we can now rule a line through this. Just destroy 48. 48 is gone. We are now left with what? We are now left with 64 for United. Now let's go to for American. For American, you are comparing this 41 and then 3.8. 41 and then 3.8. You can see that 41 is better. So on the basis of that, we'll kill this 48 here too. It's gone. So our final answer is going to be 64 for United, and then 64 for American. So this becomes our final results that we have. That becomes our final 4.1, 4.1. Okay. So let me just go and then show you. And so it's just a matter of dealing with iterative elimination, iterative elimination, iterative elimination. And then we can eventually see that now 4.1, 4.1, 0. So our pure strategy Nash equilibrium using the iterative elimination of strictly dominated strategy, iterative elimination of strictly dominated strategy, or iterative deletion of strictly dominated strategy. Okay. The pure strategy Nash equilibrium is QA64 and QA64. Okay. So 64 becomes the equilibrium for United, whereas this one becomes the equilibrium for that. Now, there's something you need to note here. So you can see that iterative elimination of strictly dominated strategy is just one way of achieving the pure strategy Nash equilibrium. Do you realize that? Iterative elimination is just one of the three ways, because we mentioned that one way is the dominant strategy approach, and then the best response approach. Okay. So iterative elimination is not as strong as the pure strategy Nash equilibrium. Pure strategy is stronger, okay. But not all equilibria can be determined using iterative elimination, which is what I just told you. Okay. So that's it for this one. Now, in this very one, we arrived at 64, 64, just one option, one cell given as a final answer. But in games where iterative elimination does not determine the strategy, there are other ways you can deal with it. Of course, I'm not teaching that other ways. The other ways, and these other ways include multiple, Nash equilibrium, no Nash equilibrium, and several other things there. So I'm going to give you this one to work it out. I'm going to work this example one here, Gene 1, with you. Then you will work the example Gene 2 yourself. I'm going to work example Gene 1 with you. We're going to work it systematically, gradually together. It's going to be fun. I'm going to work it together with you. The idea is to make it as fun as possible. As fun as possible.